math is a language to help you understand the world around you, and social emotional learning is a language to help you feel the world around you. And what we have to do first is connect with the students, because the more that they trust you, the greater heights you can take them in your classroom, for the learning. So what I do is I ask open-ended questions to my students as a way to check in, and then also as exit tickets, because when I think about, educating my students, like, social emotional learning is not something else to be added to the plate. It actually is the plate that everything rests on.
Welcome to Purposeful Empathy, a show that's dedicated to amplifying the voices of people from across the globe who understand that the world needs more empathy and are doing something about it. This season is devoted to the power of empathy in education. Meet 12 visionary leaders from the Transformative Educational Leadership Fellowship Program and learn how they are bringing meaningful change to their schools. You won't want to miss a single episode, so hit the subscribe button now. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the show. So welcome to a new episode of Purposeful Empathy. Today I'm joined by Dr. Al Rabanera, a dedicated high school math educator at La Vista High School in Fullerton, California. With more than 20 years experience, Al has made it his mission to empower at-promise students through social emotional learning, college and career readiness, and restorative practices. As the lead academy teacher, Al has developed innovative programs that boost student confidence, engagement, and academic success. But his impact doesn't stop in the classroom. He's also a passionate advocate for educators, serving on multiple state and national level advisory boards to help shape educational policy and practice. His work has earned him prestigious awards, including the Horace Mann Award for Teaching Excellence and a Golden Bell Award for his Transformative Academy program. As the son of Filipino immigrants, he understands the power of representation, identity, and belonging in education. His lived experiences fuel his commitment to making a difference in the lives of students and educators alike. And this season, I'm exploring the power of empathy in education. I've invited Al to be a guest because that's precisely what he practices and exemplifies. Welcome to the show, Al.
Thank you, Anita. I'm so excited to be here today to share my story and my experiences in the classroom.
Sweet, and I'm so glad to do this with you. We are both fellows with the Transformative Educational Leadership Fellowship Program. So anyways, I'm very excited to dig in. I guess the place I would love to start is just your backstory. I wonder if, we've just heard an impressive bio, and this series of podcasts is really meant for anybody who educates, whether it's in the classroom directly or serves schools at any level, just to find a home in this conversation. So what would you like to share about yourself that is sort of adding a little bit more color and context to that bio?
Thanks, Anita. What I'd like to share, I'd like to dig deeper, a little bit deeper into my backstory of being a son of immigrant parents. Navigating K-12 education was very unfamiliar for my family, like many immigrants. So going through school, I was initially placed into English as a second language, when I was in elementary school. To me, it didn't make any sense why I was in that space, because at home we were speaking English. And as I began to navigate through that space, it was like, um, I would say, trying to find my identity as a learner, trying to find that sense of belonging, and then even like where I had choice in, how I got to apply what I learned. And by that, what I mean is, um, because I'm Filipino, that puts me in the Asian category. But because of the complexion of my skin, I often get mistaken for, a student that can be identified as Black or Latinx. So on both sides of the spectrum, I was thought that I thought I had to perform very high, but I was treated like I was always performing very low. And that was through my entire K-12 experience. So it was like when I decided to become an educator, what I thought about was like, what was my experience there? How can I help motivate students, so they didn't have that, um, same experience as me, and to create a space where students felt like they were seen and they were heard and their lived experiences were valued.
Wow. Yeah, that really sets the context for what why you're so mission driven. I can completely relate. I just wonder if maybe you could share um, how I met, so if I just backtrack for a second, we know that students, when they come to school and they don't have enough food in their bellies to eat and they're hungry, they can't learn properly. I also know that if they're feeling sort of like they don't have a sense of belonging, they're not feeling seen or heard, or their identity is like being questioned and they're sort of being categorized, as you've just described, that it also kind of complicates the capacity for learning and just a sense of like belonging in a space with other peers. Like, how was that for you growing up? Like, how did that impact how you saw yourself and how you related to others and how you navigated your education?
Uh, so when I would attend school or even be in, you know, other educational spaces, I would take a look and see who's in the room, right? And what I would notice is most of the time, or a lot of the time, that I didn't see a lot of people that look like me, or sounded like me. So it felt like a space where I was I had to be comfortable with the discomfort, and I always had to be on my A game. So when I'm moving into spaces, I would have to be not just prepared, but over prepared, knowing that I'm representing more than myself in these spaces. And when I think about my students, I think about like, how can they see themselves as a learner and doer of math, in my math classes, and then in my other classes where I teach about social emotional learning, college and career readiness, and restorative justice, restorative practices. Like, how can I make these spaces inclusive where students feel comfortable to share? And what I've found throughout the years is that checking in on my students, like one-on-one, like on a weekly basis or more, helps me develop those relationships and that rapport. So I can really understand, you know, what students are going through, what their lived experience is, and then especially if something is off. So if I'm getting a different reaction than, what I've seen based off of their previous patterns, I know that something is happening. And then because we have that relationship, I can ask more open-ended questions to see what's going on, and then also provide them with supports, if not through me, but through like the other available resources at the school.
Right. And I assume that you're trusted because, it's so interesting. I've heard a new term. There's visible minority, but then there's also the global majority, right? And it depends on which frame you want to use, but you must be trusted because you have had that lived experience and people would know that about you. Now, I just wonder, this wasn't part of the planned conversation, but we're taping this in February of 2025, and there's this like mad hate on any DEI work, whether it's in the professional context or in the academic context. And that must drive you a bit bananas because you know how important it is. You've just described so eloquently that you felt like you had to overperform because you were representing more than just yourself. And now people are being, people who are qualified, they're in positions, are being subjected to the kind of judgment that they're just there because of some identity marker. How do you feel about that?
Well, to go back to what you were saying, that idea of DEI questions that I think about and reflect on are, what does that person not like about diversity? What does that person not like? Well, and by that I mean, okay, you don't want a diverse group of people, a diverse group of ideas. You don't want people to share about their experiences so we can connect.
Hmm.
What does that person not like about equity. You don't want to give, and I know to operationalize equity, there's a lot of different ways to approach it. And the way I take a look at equity is, giving people what they need to be successful. So you don't want to give people what they need to be successful in the work that they're doing, like my colleagues' professional learning experiences or identifying best practices, having conversations about data. And then for students, like you don't want to provide them with the extra supports they may need through 504s or IEPs, or you don't even want to provide them with multi-tiered systems of support. Like everyone's getting tier one support. What about students that need tier two and tier three? Like, and then the last idea, you don't want to include everybody. So if you don't want to include everybody, who gets to decide who gets excluded? So when I think about, what's happening, like in my classroom, you know, what I think about is how can I bring my students in so they feel a part of this community, so that their voices are heard, they feel seen. And when I think about what's happening outside my classroom walls, I think about like what are the different ways that I can have impact to share what's happening in my classroom, and then even share ideas because I've done work outside for state and federal policy work. Like, well, what are the actions that need to take place to, fight against this anti-DEI movement? If it's calling or writing representatives, if it's coalition building or joining a collective, or even this past weekend, sharing at a conference about how, agency, belonging, and identity fit into STEAM spaces where you can be, inclusive, um, have equity, and then diversity of voice to plan school-wide events, and then also, um, including community partners and by student voice and choice, like elevating and celebrating their voices to, um, provide them with options for things that they're interested in. And those are all very diverse based off of their experiences. So we're in very interesting times to say the least.
Yeah, well, thank goodness that you are a voice in those spaces on behalf of the students and the educators. So good on you for the work that you do. But it must be exhausting. It must be emotionally and psychically draining to always be fighting for something that you see as so obvious to address.
Yeah. I think that in those spaces, what I think about is how do we take care of the caregivers? So what I've learned is, to be really reflective about what I'm doing and what I'm investing my time and energy into, because like you mentioned, like, investing your time into all of these different activities is draining. So how can I put my best foot forward in the activities I choose to be a part of?
Mhm.
So I can give like, in that space, I'm present and mindful about how I am using my energy and expertise to help move that particular work forward.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Now, your work focuses on empowering at promise students. And I love that frame, at promise. So I'm going to ask you about that because, we're familiar with the at risk frame, but the at promise just sort of changes the frame a bit. So you focus on empowering at promise students who often feel unseen in educational spaces. So I'd love for you to unpack, explain what at promise means to you. And then if you could share any moments when you felt that a student truly felt seen in the classroom and how that shaped your approach to teaching.
Um, so to address that idea of at promise, I'm going to go back to the idea of at risk. So I've been teaching 21 years at a continuation school, so 16 to 19-year-old students who are credit deficient. It's in an alternative education program. So students who were, had challenges, academic challenges at their comprehensive high school, who fell behind in credits or transferred over. So what are they at risk of? I've been taught was they were at risk of not graduating within the 4 years. So that's like the blanket term for those students, but they can be at risk for many other different factors outside of the school, like behavioral factors, substance or discipline factors. So when I use this term at promise, what it actually does is flip that idea of at risk, taking a strengths-based approach. At promise of what, at a promise that I'm going to give, the best I can to help these students be successful in their next step. At promise of, moving forward in a college or career. At promise of being academically successful, just providing students with a frame of, okay, what can we say, what can, or how can we identify your strengths and then build on these strengths, And what are you passionate about? What do you want to learn about? Like, how can we take all of these ideas and help you move forward with them in a way that will help you that will positively impact your future. So these are the ideas I think about with at promise students. And the second part of your question is like, how have I felt, or what have I done to make, at promise students seen and heard? Um, so earlier in my career, I served as the activities director, so associated student body for about 10 years. And during that time, you know, I've worked with kids outside the traditional math class, and what we did, work with community partners, put on activities for the school, fundraisers, voter registration. So one particular instance that really stands out to me is a student named Isaias. So Isaias had just transferred in from juvenile hall, and he was a little bit, I would say, guarded in how he approached school, how he approached the class, how he approached classmates, and even myself, because he had never been in a space where, you had the opportunity to make choices and your voice was elevated to impact what was happening at the school level. And they were planning for an activity, like a noontime activity where you engage the student body in a game, and the winners of the class would earn points. And it was his group's turn to do an activity. And because there wasn't as much participation as he'd like, he thought that he had failed.
Mm.
So then he came back into the classroom right after the activity, and we were debriefing. And he said something to me that has stuck with me, ever since. He said, Mr. Rab doesn't care about us anymore because we failed. And I was like, whoa, hold on. And then I had a conversation with him. I was like, Isaiah, you know what? I'm going to take this is what I tell the students, if this is what I told the students, when you do well, it's because you worked hard at the activity. When it doesn't go well, it's my fault because I didn't guide you
Mm.
through to make sure that, you were aware of all of the different things that could happen, you know? And I'm like, I'm never giving up on you, Isaiah, or any of the other students in the class. But I think for me, because I've, worked with the student population my entire career, I think it is just a way for students to say, like, you know what, I'm giving up. It's a little bit easier if I can blame someone else, you know, or like because something didn't work out. But then I think in that time, it's a teachable moment to show students like, you, I'm here to catch you, when something isn't working out well, and to teach them how to be resilient in these spaces and that they're seen and they're heard. Because what I've heard from, my students through the years is like like other teachers at, their comprehensive high schools would just let them slip through the cracks because, I'm on a pacing guide. I need to move through the content. They don't really see me or answer my questions because there's, maybe 38 to 40 other kids in the class. And they say they just don't have that time to sit with me and talk to me to find out who I really am, and I say it's like, after that interaction that we had and just continuing to check in on him, finding out more who about him as a student, and then like what led to him saying that, like I was able to, have the different strategies to help him be more resilient to navigate spaces, not just in student activities, but at school, to help him earn his credits so he can graduate and be, move on to the next chapter of his life. I think what a lot of it has to do with as educators, and this is a word that doesn't get talked about a lot, is like we have to love our students and not in a romantic way, not in a romantic way, but in an unconditional way, like to humanize the classroom, not just teaching about content, but actually teaching about learning, teaching the person in front of you. And when I bring that up, sometimes, some of my colleagues see teaching the content and teaching the student one and the same, not separating them and seeing them as like unique individuals. So it's like, well, for myself, like I need to love my students and I need to believe in my students more than they believe in themselves, like Isaiah, until they believe in themselves more.
Mm. I listened to your story, and what comes up for me is there's a lesson around worthiness in taking the time to acknowledge that they matter, that you care about them, right? And so I really, really, I teach too. I teach at college, and that's different. But I've always felt that nurses and educators are the most under-celebrated professionals in the world because they do work that is their calling, and it takes so much more than the technical aspect of what the profession requires. It really takes, like what you're describing as love. It really takes this understanding that in front of you is a human being with all sorts of complex emotions, and the power that educators have to uplift their students one student at a time, and then the student body as a whole is enormous. Because if you ask a random adult to give you a moment in time where they felt small, they can probably remember something that happened at school with a teacher. I remember it. It was when my English teacher called my father a Polish peasant, and that's how he referred to my father. And then there's times when, you've been uplifted by a teacher who, I still remember a geography teacher telling me, I wish you had won the student council election, even though you probably shouldn't have said that. But, so I feel like there's just, with that kind of power comes enormous responsibility to really see the role as an educator as also like a kind of like ambassador for uplift and love.
Yeah. I'm 100% like, all about what you're saying. And, I think that people, and I'm going to make just a general blanket statement that it may be that because, people attend K-12 school and they were in that system, they feel like they know what happens, on the day to day or what teachers are doing because, hey, I went to school, everyone went to school. We might have similar experiences, but as people on the outside looking in don't really understand what it takes to, develop these relationships or build this rapport while juggling instructional strategies, and identifying what in the, curriculum needs to be taught and the, formative assessments to help move the learning forward. It's, like you mentioned, a very complex system, but because, people have gone through K-12 education, they can say, well, when I was in school, like you were saying, when I was in school, this is what this was my negative experience and this was my positive experience. But because so many people can have that, share these experiences anecdotally and very quickly, they don't really understand what it takes, behind the scenes to even lead a class or differentiate instruction or to meet students where they're at.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, you know, people go to a doctor's office or the dentist. You go to the dentist, right? Like maybe once every 6 months, and it's maybe not something you're familiar with versus attending school 185 days for, 12 years. Like it's a different look because people are more familiar with being in educational spaces versus other professional spaces because we have to earn credentials, and many of us have doctorate or master's degrees, and then some have doctorate degrees. So this advanced learning that we're taking into our classrooms doesn't get taken into account just because someone may have an experience of I went to school versus
You
this is
know,
what.
I never thought about it, Al, but I would never sit in a dentist chair. And because I've had the lived experience of going to the dentist like twice a year, that I'd know how to do cavity fill better, right? But yet, when it comes to teaching, there's this sense of like, well, I know what education should look like, whether it's from the parents or the administrators. And so I think there's a big case to be made that you have to listen to the teachers' voices because they are on the ground and they see what's really happening. So thank you for making that case. I want to switch gears because you are really a specialist in math, right? So math is often seen as a subject that students struggle with, right? Either their confidence takes a hit or it's they struggle with different mindsets. They have maybe a fixed mindset. Maybe you could share what that's all about. So I'd love to hear how you use math as a tool to help students develop agency and identity and a sense of belonging.
The way I use math, as that tool is I start off my classes by saying this. Math is a language to help you understand the world around you. And how often do you practice that language at home? And what language do you practice at home? And how often do you practice that? What about at school? So if math is a language to help you understand the world around you, let me help you, in our time together, learn the language, and we'll learn the language together. I also talk about social emotional learning with that idea of math. So math is a language to help you understand the world around you, and social emotional learning is a language to help you feel the world around you. And what we have to do first is connect with the students because the more that they trust you, the greater heights you can take them in your classroom, for the learning. So what I do is I ask open-ended questions to my students as a way to check in and then also as exit tickets. Because when I think about, educating my students, like social emotional learning is not something else to be added to the plate. It actually is the plate that everything rests on. So that's the foundation, social emotional learning. Now I'm putting math into it. Now I don't have to guess at, where's this real life application? Let me pull this example from the textbook about, snorkeling and, or even like mountain climbing or the Iditarod, where students don't have any, contextual experience about that. Let me ask the students, how do you see yourself as a learner of math, or when do you use math in the real world? Let me tell you a story about a student I have, Armando. I call him Mondo. So when I asked Mondo this question, his response was, I use math when I go to the grocery store. I use it to translate to help my grandma purchase groceries because she speaks Spanish. So he sees that practical application of translating, using numbers, right, and making that connection to math. So how can I take that information, you know, use it when I'm planning, and then how can I share it out with my students so everyone knows in the class if I remove his name, they can also relate to that idea to create that sense of belonging, right? Because now the way I create the sense of belonging is I share out not just my experiences, but all of the students' experiences so they can see this is what's happening in the classroom, right? In the lives of my classmates. Maybe it's something they can relate to. Maybe it isn't. At least they're aware, and we're not just taking a look at numbers on the board. And then I take these ideas, right, of the students and I build lessons around them. Like some of the ideas for student agency, so giving my students voice and choice is when I'm teaching graphing, I take a look at data that makes sense to them. And an example of that is I pull data from the Department of Labor about um, salary, weekly income, right, gender, and then educational attainment that's current. So I have students take a look at, the first quarter, well, first quarter of last year and the third quarter of last year. That was a previous lesson I did, comparing them, asking questions, so what, now what? So what is it about? Summarize it. How does it impact you? Right? So that's the what. So what? So where's the math? What does the math mean? What does it help you understand? Because you see these disparities in salaries between gender and then also educational attainment. It gets them thinking like, how much money do I need to live? What do I need to do to earn, you know, whatever income that I'm looking at? And then the now what are like, what questions, what are things that you predict are going to happen? Do you think this is going to go up in the next quarter? Do you think it's going to go down? Like, what impact might this have on you based off of where you think, your next steps are going to be after, you graduate high school? Like, what are your post-secondary choices? And will your choices take you where you want to be?
It's making math relevant to your students, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And I also want to ask, as someone who's navigated marginalization yourself, in your own educational and professional journey, how do you ensure that your leadership and advocacy creates lasting systemic change? So that's some big heavy lifting.
So this was what I was taught. First is take a look at where you want to go. See the people that are in these spaces and places, right? And then are they living the lifestyle that I want to live? So that's like one of the things I think about. And, if that person is doing what I want to do and they're living the lifestyle they want to live, I do research about their work and then see how I can be mentored by that person, to learn more about how to navigate spaces and places. And what I've been taught is to create this idea of durable sustainability. There's like two different, I would say two different thoughts around it. So the first thought that I was taught was you need three ideas. So the ideas are systems, collaborations and partnerships, and then resource acquisition. So what system are you in? What do the systems look like? How do they operate? Right? collaborations and partnerships? How do you bring outside partners, nonprofits, into these spaces to move this vision forward? And then the resources are fall under three different categories. So human, fiscal, and in kind. So do we have the people to move the work forward? Do we have the finances in place? Is this one-time money or is it line item money? Because what I was taught, because I've done a lot of budget work, I've been a principal investigator for grants and directed grants and sat on various budget study committees and sat on boards where we take a look at this. Like, if it's one times money, you don't pay for things that like are ongoing. So, and sometimes organizations use one times money for ongoing, and if it's a line item, then more than likely that funding will come back for the next year to keep that program in place. And then the last idea is the in kind. So, what are your partners bringing to the table? Is it money? Is it expertise? Is it space? Is it time? Is it their staff? So one way to create that durable sustainability, systems, collaborations, and partnerships, and, resources. The other way I was taught was like a much bigger way, like the bigger idea, like on the federal level, because that way that I just mentioned was something that could be used on like the local level, state level, federal level. The other thing that I was taught was on the federal level was policy, practice, and research. So when you put those three things in place, policy, what are we doing on the federal level to ensure that, federal funds or even state funds are going to be allocated, turning this into potentially laws. So that's the policy. What is the research behind it? You know, who's doing the research? Is it peer reviewed? Is it relevant? What is that research saying about that particular idea that's, potentially going to be funded? And then what does it look like in practice? Like, who's doing it? Where are they doing it? Is it being successful? So policy, practice, and research, put those three things together. Oops. And that's what I learned from, people that are doing federal work about durable sustainability.
I think what I'm really enjoying about this conversation is how committed you are to right in front of you, the student, right at the micro level, and how you're also engaged and committed to what's happening at a systems level. And congratulations that you're able to straddle both those universes, right? Because the macro does have a way of impacting the micro. And you knowing what's happening at the micro level has a way of impacting the macro. So that's amazing. I have two more questions for you, Al. And this is a podcast that is devoted to empathy. You've alluded to it, so now I just want to make it more explicit. What role do you think empathy plays in education?
Hmm. Well, I think I would say empathy plays a huge role in education. If you're talking about like the classroom setting, for example, like how are we humanizing the classroom, recognizing and honoring students' diverse lived experiences, creating an inclusive atmosphere, things that we've been touching, during our conversation. How am I designing lessons that connect to real world contexts that are relevant to the kids? Not just, hey, here's a real life application, but actually like connecting to the kids. And I think also in the classroom, that idea of actively listening, building these relationships and modeling for the students what it looks like, what it sounds like, what it feels like, because what I tell teachers in our professional learning communities that I lead at the school is like, be mindful of the energy you bring into the space because everyone can feel that energy. And then I dip a little bit into the neuro research behind it. Like, your brain can process 40 ideas in a second, consciously. And subconsciously, it can process 3 million ideas. So if your brain can process all of these ideas subconsciously, it can feel the energy that you're, exuding. And it can feel like people can feel, yeah, what is gonna, like being around you. Like sometimes you want to be around that person, you just feel their energy and it's positive. I want to be around that person. But then if there's somebody that, maybe having an off day or like you can feel it.
Yeah.
And how can we provide them with what they need? And also, like, I think that in the classroom, empathy is a tool for change. Like the idea of social emotional learning being a foundational piece, not just another thing added, but actually another thing added to the plate. Not the plate, but the actual, well, not another thing added to the plate, but the actual plate, and using it as a tool for change.
Yeah, as you articulated, the social emotional learning is the foundation upon which we can do any educating, right? I heard you say that earlier. I'm going to slip in a little micro follow-up question, because I can relate to those. Some teachers having an off day. Like I had my ribs are completely bruised from a ski fall, and I was in a lot of pain last week in my class, and I don't think I was at my best. So, what's your go-to practice for self-empathy? So you give yourself a little tenderness and kindness when you're not at your best. I'm curious to know if you have a go-to practice.
Um, Usually to recenter myself, and motivate myself. I think it's a funny thing to do, but it's clapping.
Oh,
So I'll start like clapping for myself, to help recenter myself and be mindful. It's just a like real quick clap. It'll be something like this, like that, you
wow.
know? And I'll do it, in whatever space I am or find a like quiet space and do that. So it'll be a way because it's like a physical, and then auditory thing, like
Yeah. But you
aesthetic.
muted it. Do it again with sound, though.
Oh, like I'll just clap like this.
Love
Uh,
it. Love it.
So it just helps me recenter myself and focus. And if
Okay.
I'm not able to do something like that, it's just taking a pause and then taking a couple deep breaths to recenter myself, and because that's a little less conspicuous than like clapping and making noise,
Sweet,
but
sweet.
pausing, yeah.
My last question of all my podcasts is the same, and I wonder if you would indulge in a story about when you were on the receiving end of empathy and what that meant for you.
Well, I would say with one of my mentors, like I had been doing this grant work around the workforce development. So recruitment and retention of a diverse teacher workforce, where I was the director and principal investigator around the work. And it was I would say, a very heavy lift because we were taking a look at high school students interested in the profession, all connecting to colleges and universities, and then connecting with early career educators and veteran educators, along with managing coordinators there, and then research coordinators, and putting together MOUs and joint venture agreements, and then awarding $100,000 in scholarships. So it was like, as I was going through the motions, I was of doing the work, it just felt like very overwhelming and not as fulfilling because sometimes the work just piles on and you have to generate these different reports and sit in all these different meetings and all of the planning. But what my mentor did for me was, she had similar experiences, was just sit and share her experiences with me, letting me know that it was being like everything would be okay, and then helping me move through the spaces. and, giving me ideas of things to look out for, as far as, going to different presentations and how I should frame the work. I've had like opportunities to share about that work on the national level. Like if I could share real quick, I was on a panel hosted by NEA and AFT, and it was at the AFL-CIO building, and the top 100 nonprofits were there to hear about, the different work that was being done around the country. And I had the opportunity to share, and, my mentor was there to help me like navigate, what to say, how to say it, and just bounce ideas off of them to help me really feel seen and heard, because in many spaces or places, I'm the only person that looks like me, because of the way I look, I can fit into brown spaces and black spaces, but at times I don't really see that many male Asians or even male Filipinos in spaces aside from affinity groups that are like specific to that type of work. So being able to, see someone who's done the work that, I was doing just was so gratifying. It was fulfilling because I can, I had someone that could guide me and be empathetic and show me how, or show me what it looked like and what it sounded like and what it felt like.
Yeah. Well, that I'm glad you had that experience and that mentor guiding you. I love asking this question because it always reminds me how simple it is to empathize and to act with empathy and to practice empathy and how much of a difference it makes. You shared at the onset of our conversation your own lived experience navigating K-12. And it looks like you're still navigating spaces where identity is an issue that you have to reflect on and you have to navigate, as you've said. So I think the invitation to anyone who's been listening and watching is, we can all stand to turn up the volume of empathy in our lives, and why wouldn't we? And to also practice a little bit more self-empathy, especially if you are in education, because there's just such we're in a moment where so much of the important work that we do that's separate from the content and the pedagogy is under attack. And we need to fight back because our students deserve it.
I'm 100% on board with you, Anita.
Well, Al, thank you so much for joining and spending this hour with me. And I want to thank everybody who's been watching and listening. And we'll see you next week at Purposeful Empathy. If you know someone who would benefit from this episode, please share it with them. Post the link to your socials and hit the subscribe button now. The world needs more empathy, and you have an important role to play.